Thank you everyone for coming this morning to the first session of the week at UNC. And what I'm particularly excited about is this is the first and I believe only session around climate resilient sanitation this week. And so you will have to leave here bringing forward messages of climate resilient sanitation to all the other sessions because it intersects all the other sessions. So hopefully you'll come out of this inspired and active and engaged and have a bit more knowledge about climate resilient sanitation. So my name is Nat Painter. I'm a consultant for UNICEF and I'll be emceeing this session. We do have a great group of presenters today and I think we'll cover a lot of good ground. Bruce will kick us off with CRS 101. We're in a university, so we're going to be using some university terms. Actually, that's the only one. So Bruce will give us a good grounding on that. And then we'll hear from Anne, who will help frame the session and how we're thinking about climate resilient sanitation and citywide inclusive sanitation and area-wide sanitation and how we build and bring these together to move forward faster. And then we'll get some real-world experiences from the World Bank, from WSUP, from LIXIL, talking about their work on the ground before moving into a Q&A and then some group work because we do not have enough brain space in our own brains. We need everyone's brain space to help us figure this out. So very much looking forward to an active and engaged group from input from the group here today. Before we move on to closing out with the Gates Foundation, who will give us some inspiration to carry us forward and carry us to the end of the day. So with that, let me pass it to Bruce.
Hey.
Feel free to applaud for Bruce.
I've been tasked with talking about CRS 101, and then I realized that many of you, or all of you, can give me a bit of CRS 101 on a Monday morning. So thanks all for being with us. And I think I first, maybe, I guess I advance my own slides. So I wanted to first kind of acknowledge that there are a tremendous amount of partners that are working with us in this space that kind of advance it. And certainly from the WHO perspective, we're really excited about pursuing climate resilient sanitation for public health reasons. But it's a dynamic space. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what it is, but a lot about why we think it's worth pursuing, and noting that and I see Barbara in the corner, but I think there's a lot of maybe we have a consensus. There is a consensus definition of climate resilient sanitation, but I think it's worth having a little bit of a discussion, just sort of philosophically, so we're on the same page. Because I think when people think about climate change, I think a lot of people see it, certainly with this conference, in terms of water, and many of the solutions to the water climate change crisis are going to be solved by climate resilient sanitation. So simply just this notion of sanitation withstanding the impacts of climate change. So disasters, floods, droughts, extreme weather, and then this sort of longer term kind of progressive changes and massive changes to hydrology and ecosystems, and how can we deal with those. And of course there's also a mitigation element. You'll hear more about this from Anne. But yes, I mentioned the public health side of this, and we know that the complexity about sanitation, all of you know, is that, sorry if I'm standing in front of this, that simply one, non-functioning, overflowing pit latrine can infect a whole community. We know that there's 1.4 million deaths per year, and we know that that's an underestimate because some of the diseases actually that are quite interesting associated with you may not necessarily think about when you first think about sanitation, such as some of these new vector-borne diseases outbreaks. Some of the mosquitoes, the culex and Anopheles stevensii, are actually flourish and adapt to some of the dirty water. So trying to kind of take off our hats on sanitation and think about some of the wider public health impacts are very important. No doubt many of you or all of you know that cholera has been resurgent over years and years. And there's, I think, a lot of soul searching going on in the cholera community about trying to improve sanitation. And we know that a lot of climate has impacted these new new cases. So yeah, a lot of concern there. And of course, there's this whole issue of where do people live, right? And there's a lot of excitement about, trying to understand vulnerability. And we know that people that are vulnerable to climate change, live in areas where they're prone to floods and everything else. So this is about trying to do the best we can in the short term as well, to try to deal with, to focus on safely managed sanitation for those that are, living in vulnerable situations. So these warmer and wetter climate situations are going to really impact us. And I also wanted to just note and remind people of some of the progress that we've been seeing. And again, this is because of collective efforts of many of us. But just first of all, this access to Green Climate Fund or access to funding. There is quite an extensive, if you haven't seen it, annex of the included in the GCF guidelines. I think it runs to about 80 or 90 pages, and it's very detailed about how countries may design and submit a quality assured proposal that is inclusive and highlighting climate resilient sanitation. We've also seen that sanitation was basically absent in many of the discussions around, or many of the policy documentation on NDCs and adaptation plans and NAPs, and we're seeing that in place now. We've seen now with the work I mentioned that Barbara is working on, also trying to measure the progress toward the global goal on adaptation, with sanitation being very prominent. And again, the issue of sanitation and the methane pledge is something that is exciting as well. But the main challenge there, and I think the main discussion for this morning, is just like, how do we work together to build capacity at country level? And again, this is something, and we'll discuss with all of you. So I mentioned this a little bit, but I mean, this is, I hope you can see the pictures, but yeah, too little water, scarcity and droughts. I think we all kind of try to maybe pigeonhole sanitation, thinking of raised latrines, but poor flush toilets that don't work, people returning to open defecation when they don't have their toilets working, and sewers becoming blocked. And that is because often there's just not enough water to wash it down the drains. And too much water, of course, is when we get pathogen spread, pit latrines collapsing, rising sea levels that overwhelm treatment plants, and people that are displaced. So the list goes on and on, but that's essentially a very quick look at some of the connections that we see that cause immediate impact. And we shouldn't forget about mitigation, which is quite important as well. I think there's been a tremendous amount of work to try to better understand and characterize, the greenhouse gas emissions from sanitation. We know that stagnant effluent, that's not accessing, the oxygen in the air, is contributing to methane, right? So some of that that sludge really needs to be managed quite a bit better. But then there's also the issue of the transportation, there's the issue of construction materials, cement, there's the issue of the disposal as well. So trying to better characterize that and reduce it with safely managed sanitation is also a big part of climate resilient sanitation. Did I just speak to that? Sorry, I'm looking at this slide. Sorry, I'm not sure. There's two slides on here. So this is what I just spoke to.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And then this is just a sort of conceptual framework, just discussing all the various ways that good sanitation, increases the, has the impacts in terms of food security, which I always think is an interesting one, but better safe use of wastewater, for instance, for agriculture leads to food security. Water supply is reasonably self-evident. Water resource management, cleaner ecosystems, protection, of course, health, and recovering the energy. So there's all sorts of good reasons why we should succeed in this. And I think previously, the situation has forced us to rethink our, this situation now has forced us to rethink our focus population. So previously, we had thought about really kind of trying to focus on safely managed sanitation for like Group A, so that point on the right-hand side, the 3.4 billion people without access to safely managed sanitation. And then there's this question of people that live in high-risk climate-impacted areas as well. And then there's the people with access to safely managed sanitation. And it's really this kind of little B or big B in the middle where people are not accessing safely managed sanitation, but there's an urgent need for new resilient sanitation services because they're living in high-risk climate impact areas. So that gives us a nice framework for really trying to target our interventions. And just to say, and I'm closing pretty much with this slide, but there's a lot of existing guidance that I think is spot on for what we're trying to do. And certainly the preventive risk assessment and management, the sanitation safety planning, is a great way to kind of a toolkit and approach to allow for climate resilient sanitation at a local level. So we should just continue to think about those, and those are available. You can see the sanitation inspection user guide, which is a simple, for all of you familiar with sanitation inspection, it's a great practical tool that allows you to assess risks using simple pictorial information. So the Climate Resilient Sanitation Coalition is working collectively towards improving prioritization capacity and investments in climate resilient sanitation. So we're really pleased that this coalition is moving along, and thanks all of you for being here today. And I think I'm going to pass it.
Thanks so much, Bruce. And I think I'm short enough, actually, to use this. So I have just come back from a meeting in Belize. It was the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Ministers Wastewater Association's high-level forum for Caribbean ministers on water. And it, ironically took place at the exact same time as the SMM, but, with a little bit of a different focus. But it was really eye-opening for me because we're at a moment now with the Climate Resilient Sanitation Coalition where, as Bruce said, there's been so much work, there's so much alignment, so many partners working in the same direction, but we are now looking at, okay, how does this actually translate into action in countries, and how do we move this forward? So I wanted to continue a little bit with what Bruce was talking about on the progress we've made, just to articulate, where we are in terms of, if we think about this as sort of a global movement, where the next steps are, but also, 3 challenges that I think are kind of critical in this space and that were illustrated to me last week while I was in the Caribbean getting this fabulous tan. I looked really different before, actually. And then I wanted to give you 3 examples of a couple of countries that are doing this in kind of interesting ways. They've been using interesting entry points and kind of leapfrogging the conversation. And of course, we have a lot of presenters, and I'm going to ask you all to talk about this in groups later. But first, there's a definition. There is a globally accepted definition on climate resilient sanitation, which essentially says these are services that can cope and adapt with extreme weather events and also minimize emissions. And it doesn't specifically specify a service level, but practically speaking, from a UNICEF perspective, and I know a lot of other agencies, we have global targets on safely managed and climate resilient sanitation. And so these are not 2 different programs, these are the same program. So we are really essentially looking at safely managed systems that can withstand climate hazards and that minimize emissions. So I just wanted to say that because it's really important in all the work we do on policies and data that these are all risk-informed processes and that they're benefiting the ultimate aim, which is climate and safely managed systems. And I think Bruce sort of underlined the point about public health, and I think when we think about climate resilience, this is an important element. So Bruce talked about the coalition. So, we've been all working in this space for a long time, but in terms of the coalition timeline, we've been working on getting the sector organized, coordinated. We've been looking at how we use the evidence to make an effective case to include climate resilient sanitation in global discussions and in the climate space. We've helped develop guidelines that help countries to implement climate resilient sanitation, and this is all happening concurrently with what's happening in the broader WASH space, which is WASH has been, has its own dedicated target. I think last year at UNC, it was the first year we knew that WASH was the first target in the global goal on adaptation. So, this has been in tandem with what's been happening globally, and that's exciting because it's keeping sanitation a part of this global discussion on climate resilient WASH. And then this year, with the support of several organizations in this room, we developed a training guideline for countries on how to implement climate resilient sanitation. So we did it with the Green Climate Fund, but really the training is agnostic, and it really is relevant to anyone who wants to do better programming that is climate resilient and safely managed. So at the moment, we are preparing to implement 2 training programs. One is Pan-Africa, and it's a virtual event that's going to engage delegations across the continent, and one is happening in the Caribbean. And in the wake of the preparatory phase for both these events, we're getting a lot of feedback from the countries on how we should tailor the event and the kind of needs that specific regions have. But it is sort of presenting some commonalities in terms of the kind of thinking that we need when we bring climate resilient sanitation to countries and to the different regions. And I wanted to share a few of those with you. One, so there are three key ones that I'm seeing. One is that sanitation is a data poor sector. I think we all know that. But specifically when it comes to safely managed sanitation, we have more countries than ever reporting on safely managed sanitation, but the quality of the data is often not telling us what that means and how that unpacks in terms of wastewater treatment. We have a second issue, which is around the poor understanding of safely managed sanitation, and not just understanding, but acceptance by countries of other options for safely managed other than sewerage. So there's a huge blind spot when it comes to safely managed sanitation and what that means. And then thirdly, when we talk about climate resilient sanitation, as Bruce mentioned, we're thinking multi-sectoral co-benefits of these programs, and that requires engaging with new actors. It requires a diversity of solutions. It requires new evidence in many cases. So there's a lot of challenges in how we do this. And if I can just pull from some of the thinking we've been doing in advance of the Caribbean, we started to look at some of the data from the 11 countries that would attend our training. And what we found is that only 6 of the 11 have data on safely managed sanitation to begin with. If we look further into that data, I picked a country where we had really good data. That was Trinidad and Tobago. And they sort of roughly reflect a broader trend in the Caribbean, which is a high reporting of at least basic sanitation services. And so when you unpack that number, you get a high percentage of that basic sanitation is on-site systems, and 25% of that is sewerage. But when you unpack it further, a very large proportion of the on-site systems are not safely managed. Most of the sewerage is safely managed, and a small proportion of the on-site sanitation is safely managed. And so, there's a clear illustration here of where the policy priority should be. It's on looking at how do we get those unsafe on-site sanitation systems that the majority of the population are using to safely managed. But when I was at this ministers' meeting last week, really the focus was purely on sewerage and how do we get sewerage systems. And I think the World Bank ran an estimate of how long it would take those countries to get to safely managed if they were looking at sewerage alone, and it was over 400 years. And so, there is a policy perspective, but priority, but the fact that we don't have good data hampers what we are able to see at a country level. A second challenge that I mentioned was, the options beyond centralized sewerage. We know that for safely managed and for climate resilient sanitation, we need to be looking beyond pipes at things like fecal sludge management, container-based sanitation, safe on-site systems. But there's currently a huge blind spot in getting the evidence in play to support countries being willing to accept alternative solutions is still a huge challenge that we're seeing at country level. And then thirdly, the processes. Have we evolved processes that can effectively engage partners and, that can bring in the multi-sectoral co-benefits, that can look at a diversity of solutions as we have for sea-wise and area-wide sanitation. With WHO, UNICEF's been working on what we call the 8 steps to safely manage sanitation, and we launched those last year just as a way for countries to think about comprehensively moving towards a higher service standard. But within that process, we've been looking at how we layer in climate resilient sanitation. So for example, like the first step is to do a sort of situation analysis. And previously we were looking at, all the data on safely managed sanitation and wastewater treatment, but now we've been entering that into that discussion. How does sanitation figure into NDCs, for example? And what are some of the climate risks that a country is facing? So it's one example of how we're trying to enrich processes so that we're doing it all in a more comprehensive way. So I wanted to share just a few examples of countries and how they're sort of thinking about the climate resilient sanitation discussion. We did a study in Nigeria last year with Bristol University and looked at, could we get a sense of what greenhouse gas emissions are in a few cities in Nigeria. We ran into the first problem, which was there was no data on wastewater treatment, and so we brought partners together at a city level, developed a ship flow diagram based on whatever data they did have, and this was, even that alone was a triggering process. It was cathartic to realize that 75% of the wastewater in the town was not safely managed. From there, we did a rough calculation of emissions, which showed that the majority of greenhouse gas emissions were coming from disposal into the environment and containment in pit latrines. And from there, the government was so excited about the data that they moved to include sanitation for the first time in their NDC, their global climate pledge, and are now looking at how to mobilize resources to take action. So it's one entry point into the discussion about safely managed and climate resilient sanitation. In Cambodia, looking at the data quality, there were issues with the definition of what safely managed was in terms of pit latrines. And so this prompted a nationwide review, sanitary inspections, the tools that Bruce mentioned, to look at, what are the definitions? Are they truly safe? And this then prompted the government to redefine safely managed sanitation standards, but also look at climate resilience at the same time. This is now included in their climate resilient national WASH strategy, and also a dedicated sanitation finance strategy that looks at, climate resilient sanitation as well. And finally, we're seeing in countries like Belize and Zimbabwe that the application of the WashFit tool, which is a tool that assesses healthcare facilities, and specifically WASH and healthcare facilities, have highlighted sort of a blind spot in terms of sanitation containment systems and treatment systems. In Belize, they found that none of the treatment systems for hospitals or healthcare facilities, smaller healthcare facilities, have adequate treatment, and that the hospitals themselves are, a public health risk because of this and the way they're discharging. And this has been hugely catalytic, again, because healthcare facilities bring together multiple sectors, and it became quite highly visible. So it's been the trigger to start thinking about climate resilient sanitation, particularly in contexts like Belize, where they are very, very vulnerable to natural disasters. So that is the last example I wanted to show, and it was just really to frame what we wanted to talk about today is, what are the challenges that your organization is facing? What are the processes that, are evolving to help us think about these issues and push the climate resilient sanitation discussion forward? How are we using multi-sectoral processes? How are we leveraging sea-wise, area-wide sanitation to bring in a diversity of approaches and bigger thinking about climate resilience? And how do we use the data strengthening imperative that we all have in our work to also drive insights and catalyze action? But we have a lot of great speakers today. They have great examples, and they're all working in different angles. So hopefully, when we get to the working groups, you will have lots of inputs for the discussion. So thanks so much for being with us today.
Great, thank you, Ann and Bruce, for kicking that off and getting us focused and organized. We're now going to move into some case studies. Okay, so we've got 3 case studies on CRS processes and approaches. We're going to start off with Sanya Lutalo from the World Bank, and then Jason's going to talk about some of the work with Lixil, and then we'll hear from Sam and the experience in Kenya. Now, I'm going to do something that you really should never do at a conference, which is try to play a video. So bear with me on this.
We're behind you.
Are you?
Supporting you.
If everyone could chant like, Nat. All right. Actually, no, that's more stressful.
We got you, Nat.
Talk amongst yourselves.
We do a little skit. Yeah. Let's do.
Reminds me of Sam was doing, doing videos and on and stuff. You can send, you can
We believe in you, Nat. We appreciate you.
It's starting to show on my computer.
That's great.
Where to start?
confused.
Yeah, you're right. How to use it.
Yeah.
Nat, it is good to be part of the audience at a time like this.
I know.
You mean rather than being that?
Exactly, yeah.
I know everyone in this room has been in exactly this situation, so I feel a lot of sympathy and love at this moment.
No, I think
So-
Lewis wants you to know that it's never happened to him.
Well, Lewis is the outlier
I was just
in any
thinking, find somebody
situation.
young.
Lewis is actually hoping that you'll ask him to run a quick icebreaker for the room. Fill time. His favorite thing to do.
Questions while we're
Well,
sitting?
yeah, or we can also start with Jason. Nat, do you want to start with Jason?
I would love to start.
Back to
Where do you want me?
Bring it down. You can stand, you just need to use the microphone.
Sitting down?
Yes.
Come on down.
See.
Honestly, I think it's a pretty good thing we ended up in. I think we're doing great.
Help is on the way.
But there is a slide, so.
Yes.
You're trying to play this one.
No, totally.
We also support you. So, just so you know.
You don't get slides anymore, Jason.
Okay.
We can chant your name if you'd like.
Why don't you
Not
start
do
with
your
questions?
presentation in the form of performative dance. Oh, great idea.
Thank you.
When you see that, you know you're little.
No one knows. We've all been there.
Just go on screen of
You
death.
can use mine. Do you want to use my email? Then I can.
No, let's move on to Jason.
Especially when it says Cape Town.
Before you.
Actually, I think, can I just stand up and then?
Yeah,
it'd be easier.
whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, great. And I forgot, are you going to ask me a question or should I just jump in?
No, you should just jump in.
Okay. Good. So I think a lot of people know me. I'm Jason Cardozi from Sato at Lixil. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how innovation is approached a little bit in Sato vis-a-vis climate resilient sanitation. And so the main lens, and Daigo, our Chief Innovation Officer, will be here tomorrow, so I'm not going to get super technical, but I'll take you to him personally if you have any very technical questions. But basically, as part of an engineering design process that he follows, he looks at the entire watershed. And don't look at this diagram too carefully. It's a domain-free but AI-generated one, so there's some errors, and that's like the 7th version actually that it did. But basically, and I think as Bruce mentioned, there's a lot of challenges in the watersheds. Too much water, too little water, increasing temperatures, and a lot of times that means more water is needed for cattle, for people, for everything. So that's the basic environment. And I think that, going through some of the parameters of this, it's very much that good sanitation is climate resilient sanitation. So approach it with that lens, recognizing the challenges on water demands, weather, and so on and so forth. So everything's done with that, and that may change, but the process remains the same. And then in Lixil, it focuses all on water and housing technology. So it's through that lens, and the housing technology just means a better home for everyone. Everything has to kind of meet that criteria. And then in the case of Sato, we're talking about the on-site users, small systems users. This is sometimes the first home toilet or the first upgrade, mainly on-site, probably 90%. And then the scale, once all that's done, the scale is actually driven, are you actually meeting someone's needs on the ground, solving day-to-day problems? And in our case, even an open defecator wants a flush toilet. I think we all know that. They've seen them, they've used them. And of course, they're experiencing floods. More often, they're experiencing drought. They want some relief from that. They want the toilet to last after the rainy season. And the big one is reduced odor. So that kind of drives the whole parameters. And this slide kind of had some interesting colors removed, but that's okay. So basically, this kind of thinking, for example, led to the Sato pan, which is out in the lobby if you want to see it. So basically, instead of a P-trap, the Sato has a counterweight door. So this does a couple things. It reduces the cost tremendously. So you can sell a unit for about $2 to $5. It uses 80% less water than a pour flush. And there's always a little water in the door that creates a seal. So that takes care of the flies and the odor. So basically, when you hear about Sato, that is the basis of basically all our products. And that's grown into different solutions depending on different segments and where people use them, whether they want to sit, they squat. And then offset systems like the iTrap, same technology, it just can go to a pit or a system. And then a large slab now for humanitarian settings. And even that eventually led to the Sato tap, which is also counterweighted gravity, which was meant to replace the tippy tap during the COVID pandemic. So this is the capture part. And I think the discussion is increasingly going to what happens after. So now we're trying to use a lot of the research people in this room are doing to develop the systems, the safely managed systems, including like the pit latrine, which should be very easy and cheap to construct and should resist a lot of the flooding and a lot of the climate issues we have. So basically, with that kind of simplistic but very methodical process, the scale to date, we're up to 46 countries. I think the big thing is we've got 9.4 million units shipped. These are mainly the capture, like the Sato pans. 82 million people reached so far. We could reach 100 by the end of the year. But I think part of the story is here, we could be double or triple this if we had better data, if the regulatory environment was stronger in the countries regarding safely managed sanitation, for example. And there was just more attention and leadership by governments on this. So I think we're depending on a lot of the discussions here to help drive the next generation and how we could get more safely managed and how we can increase the scale even more. Because this is still just a drop in the bucket. I think for one toilet, it's not bad, but there's a lot more to do. And we should also be seeing a lot more competitors, I think, in our space. And I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that, but it's true. So anyway, you can follow us along online, of course, and we'd like to keep in touch. I think there's a lot of discussions to go on in terms of the research. We want to get into the methane space too and try to understand that a little better as well. But that's just a quick overview of Sato. Happy to talk more and answer any questions. Thanks.
I'm glad you invited questions because you will be getting them in a minute. But first, we're going to go to Sam to talk about the experience in Nairobi with WSUP. So Sam, over to you.
Great, okay, thank you. I think I can probably use this. So hi everyone, I'm Sam Jabble from Sanitation for Urban Populations. For anyone that doesn't know WSUP, we have 6 country programs in Africa and Asia. I'm going to give today a case study from Kenya, and selected Kenya because it's a really powerful example where you have both operational and systems level responses around climate resilient sanitation. And just to say the case I'm about to present, there is also material on this in the training package that Anne mentioned, developed for proposals to Green Climate Fund, and also in the World Bank report, which I imagine Sanyu was going to mention, or maybe still will mention, around the global sanitation crisis. So beginning with some context on Nairobi, many of you may know, has a fast-growing population. It's grown by 20% just in the last 5 years. Around 2/3 of that population lives in very densely populated informal settlements at the periphery of the city, where access to safely managed sanitation is very low, and it's experiencing multiple climate hazards. So those include rising temperatures, and also then this combination that we see in a number of countries in the region, Lusaka, for example, in Zambia, where these cities are vulnerable to water scarcity and drought, but also to extreme precipitation and flooding. And the picture that you see here is from Mukuru, which is an informal settlement, one of the largest in Nairobi, has around 400,000 people, and also one of the most climate vulnerable. So it's very low-lying, very vulnerable to flooding. And you see here essentially an open sewer running through Mukuru, and it's very easy to imagine the health risks that that presents unless these climate issues are dealt with. So beginning then with some operational responses that have been piloted in Mukuru. So there are 2 technologies that I want to highlight. First of those is simplified sewer systems. Now, simplified sewers have been piloted, led by Nairobi Water, also with WSUP and Nairobi Metropolitan Services, and piloted successfully in Mukuru as part of an integrated urban slum upgrading program. Really significant program that also includes improvements to solid waste management and drainage. Simplified sewers, you see conceptualized on this graphic, they have a number of advantages, particularly for densely populated informal settlements. So they're more flexible than conventional sewer systems. They can be laid at a lower depth. They are cheaper, but they are also, importantly, more climate resilient because they need less water than conventional systems, and they're less likely to break down in incidents of flooding. And then secondly, container-based sanitation. It's great that we have Rufi in the room from Fresh Life. So Fresh Life have been delivering CBS successfully in Nairobi for a period of time. CBS, you may know, involves active management, and we know this is key in terms of the mitigation benefits of climate resilient sanitation, keeping fecal waste moving through the system. Also has adaptation benefits in water scarce contexts and promotes circular economy models, which is really leveraging that link between sanitation and, for example, agriculture and food security, which is important in understanding the climate resilient benefits of sanitation. So we have these 2 technologies that have been piloted successfully and also in other cities in Nairobi, but there are also a number of systems level responses. And when I saw the title of this session around additionality, I tried to give this some thought in terms of what might be framed as core sea-wise interventions that we're seeing in Kenya, and what might then have a particular climate resilience benefit. So I'm going to move through the Banks Framework, Policy Institutions, Regulation, Financing, and in black you see core interventions. In red, these are interventions that might be part of any sea-wise package, but they also have a particular climate benefit. So in Kenya, we have the 2010 Constitution, embeds the human right to sanitation. Kenya Vision 2030 commits to achieving universal access to sanitation. But you also have then within policies like the Kenya Environmental Health and Sanitation Policy, specific mandate to use container-based sanitation. At the institutional level, there's a really significant shift happening now in Kenya. Utilities, taking on responsibility for non-sewage sanitation. Previously only responsible for sewage sanitation. We're seeing in cities like Malindi, Kisumu, Nakuru, cities embracing this mandate, and that's a really huge ask of utilities. It has a lot of financial and human resource implications, but they are moving that work forward. That, I would say, is a core Seawise intervention. If Seawise is achieved in Kenya, that will be core to it. But there's also activities that are going further around integrated urban development and integrating sanitation with solid waste management and drainage, like we saw in Nakuru with the integrated slum upgrading program. And we know in urban contexts in particular, integration of sanitation with wider urban development is absolutely core to climate resilience. And if we go to regulation, WaterAid really doing fantastic work, the Water and Sanitation Regulator. They have introduced or are introducing now a KPI that will track levels of on-site sanitation, including in informal settlements in cities across Kenya. That, I think we can say, is a core intervention, but they're also then supporting measures with a specific climate benefit, acceptance of reuse products. They've introduced guidelines like disaster preparedness and mitigation guidelines for utilities. They've supported simplified sewers as a recommended option for urban sanitation. And then finally, financing, or really at the interface of regulation and financing, you have a sanitation development fee. And Angela Kimani from WSUP, she was speaking at World Water Week in August, and she made the point that we can expect climate resilient sanitation to cost more. I'd say that's an evidence gap. We need more data on that, but it makes this imperative to create sustainable financing streams for sanitation even more important. WaterAid are looking at developing a sanitation development fee, which is a surcharge on water bills that could ideally then be ring-fenced to support non-sewage sanitation. And we have Fresh Life recently being accredited for carbon credits as a very clear example of a climate-specific intervention. So that's an overview in Kenya, and there's a lot happening there, both operationally and at the systems level, which I think is instructive.
Great, thank you, Sam and Jason. And we're still got our fingers crossed we're going to get this video shown, but in the meantime, we'd love to do some Q&A from the audience. Any questions? I'll run the mic around. You guys will have to share this mic. So please, I know this segment is not a bashful segment, but one that has strong opinions that they want to air. Yes, you twitched, and that's a commitment. Here you go. And please introduce yourself and your organization.
Good morning. My name is Joshua Knight. I'm with the Catholic Engineering Corps, and I'm sorry I came in late, but I only heard the last presentation. Amazing. So just a little bit, if you could explain a little bit more about the technical aspect of the shallow sanitary system that is able to run, versus the container-based. So one question about the shallow system, just if you could explain a little bit more about how that's gonna work with, you said it that it runs on maybe a lower percent drainage level or something like that to make it work, that it can be shallower. And then also with the container-based, I mean, if you're in an urban system, you're going to have some way to get that out to the fields, right? Because they don't, I mean, if they're living in that horrible place, they're not going to have any gardens or anything to put that fertilizer on. So just a little bit more about that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me take 2 questions and then pass it on to this gentleman over here was faster off the draw.
I don't feel faster off the draws. Okay. Yeah, great session. So this is Will Tillett from Self-Help Africa. I was in Malawi last week, and one of the areas we're looking at is around district-wide wash and climate-resilient district-wide wash. And it's very clear that some of our small-scale kind of market-based sanitation pilots in rural Malawi, where ability, let alone willingness to pay, is very difficult. I think what we're really looking for is significant scalable models for targeted smart subsidies for climate exposed communities. And I think just looking at some of the points earlier around, there's still limitations and knowledge gaps around SMS, etc. I think there's a risk that, or there's a need for a lot of upskilling in the sector where you've got, I don't think that many organizations still really get it with SMS. I think there's still further work to be done there. But also the upskilling that's needed around climate resilience and particularly climate finance for sanitation, and then this kind of general sector general sector knowledge gap around what a scalable smart subsidy looks like for rural sanitation. And I think if those three things can be kind of put together to upskill the sector more generally, I think it would be really, really useful, particularly in the urban space. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Sam, do you want to tackle these? Also, I'll put it out to anyone else in the audience who wants to take on any of these questions. But let's start off, Jason and Sam. What do you think?
Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's exactly the kind of technical question I dread in these sessions. Just to be transparent on that. But yeah, first thing to say is we have a guide. I will come to a response. But we have a guide on simplified sewers in Kenya that looks at all of these technical aspects around the system. So very happy to share that with you and connect you with our Kenya team. But to give a kind of very high level overview, I mean, there are a number of points to outline. So I mentioned the flexibility of these systems, the piping material, I think it's HDPE, which is lower cost and more flexible than is typically used in conventional sewer systems, which is really important for navigating these densely populated settlements. The fact that you can install them at a lower shallower depth is, again, advantageous for this type of settlement in terms of construction. They're gravity-fed systems, so they don't require pumping, which again creates a resilience benefit. So these are a number of the advantages, and I'll share the guide, but grateful I got through that question. Thank you.
Yeah, Jason, you want to add?
Well, maybe just on, I think Will made a great point. Yeah, I think from our perspective, we've experienced this as well. And I mean, from the user market to the policy level, there's so many competing priorities right now. And I think the clarity on what SMS is, what are those 41 indicators or wherever it is now, would help tremendously in achieving scale. Just that basic knowledge, never mind where the funding is coming from. But that could be a great baseline to get more funding and to increase scale for all of us.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Comfort Hatcher Mukasa. I'm from WaterAid, Uganda. I envy Kenya for many reasons. Ours is Vision 2040, yours is Vision 2030. You have a regulatory system that seems to be working. Ours is struggling. She's telling me it's not there. We're working on it, but we're facing a lot of challenges. So I come from a point of envy, but also thank you so much for sharing that. Gives me hope that we'll get there someday. I'm so interested in the surcharge because we have the same thing in Uganda. Our National Water and Sewage Corporation will hike prices for certain settlement areas so that we have, it's not the selective subsidy for certain populations. But what's interesting is how do you track that fund and make sure it comes back into investment into sanitation? Because that's where our greatest challenge is. The money is happening, but if you've been to my city, and this is not to downplay the city, it's not uncommon to find overflowing sewage, like for a week. And we have that surcharge taking place. So does Kenya have a mechanism from experience of tracking that fund? And still about the financing to the sanitation, climate resilient sanitation. I know there's a lot of potential within the users and the communities to pay for sanitation actually, especially when you do a very good cost-benefit analysis for them. Like you said, it doesn't come cheap, but with the cost-benefit analysis, it does happen. So for Kenya, the Kenyan experience, the willingness to pay and the ability, the balance, if you can tell us more about the balance. Because like I said, I like the trend this is taking. But also, he talked about the subsidy, and my brain went to the angle of selective subsidy for the less privileged.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really glad I'm not on the panel, but just facilitating the panel between these technical questions and financing. Oh, I'm sorry, this gentleman, but I will come back to you.
No,
yeah, you're
take that question.
You're okay.
Thank you. My name is Jen Nabinyamulumba. I work with IRC in Uganda. I have two quick questions to the previous speakers. To Bruce, next week Uganda is launching we are launching our WashNap. We've really done a lot of work to put it together. My worry is that we are getting another additional document. Any tips from wherever, where NAPs are already out there, on how to really make it a functioning NAP? Because last year we launched the health NAP. So this year we are launching the wash NAP. And then to Anne, data poor sector. Data has always been a problem everywhere, whether it's in agriculture, in energy, in wash. Sanitation is still a very private issue, even if we are forcing it to get into the public. How do you think we can do it differently to just improve on the data that we need for the sanitation sector?
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to invite Anne and Bruce up to the hot seats up there to join your colleagues, because you've been called out by Jane, classic Jane move to call out people in the audience. But while they head up there, maybe Jason and Sam, if you want to talk about the tariff and financing issues as I head over to Gustavo.
Yeah, so I can thank you for the question on the development fee. So, I mean, we think this is a really significant development, and it's not only Kenya, first thing to say. So WSUP, my organisation, has just conducted a review of sanitation development fees. So you have one that's just been introduced by AUDA, the regulator in Mozambique, as well. We've had a long-standing sanitation tariff or surcharge, as it's called, in Lusaka in Zambia. But I think in Zambia in particular, there has been an issue around effective ring fencing of funds. So I think you're absolutely right to highlight that. I think that's the key point that needs to be built into the structure, how to ensure that the revenues are ring fenced to be spent on on-site sanitation. And that's an issue that WaterAid is very aware of, and which we will be mindful of also WSUP in supporting the pilot. The key point there I would emphasise really is the connection between the regulator and the service authority. So that there needs to be, for example, support in defining eligible services, very clear key performance indicators, and the regulator needs to be tracking the flow of these funds and how then they are being spent. And that's something actually that WaterAid has supported AURA with in Mozambique, defining those eligible services and those KPIs. So there is experience to learn from. It's a small part of the financing piece as well. I think needs to be emphasised. This is the financing gap for non-sewage sanitation, of course, is huge. This is a meaningful contribution, but still will leave a lot of other sources that need to be tapped into. And then briefly on willingness to pay. So we know that the willingness to pay is there for sanitation surcharges in these countries, and in Kenya we know it specifically because we commission research looking at willingness to pay, and it's in these cases to roll out this type of mechanism. Actually the most relevant part is willingness to pay of middle and high income utility customers. Are they willing to pay this extra amount on their water bill that will support services to low income areas, and what is effective messaging around that? And the research that was delivered by Acquire, commissioned by WaterAid, found that messaging around trust is the most important criteria there. So these surcharges need to be messaged in a way where it's clear to middle and high income utility customers that these funds will be spent in the way that the utility says they will be spent, and that's all seems to be on track to be delivered in Kenya. We'll see. It's only just now being piloted.
Yeah, Jason, do you have anything on the costs or anything, or?
No, just to add on willingness to pay, at least in our little part of the sanitation sector, we find it very elastic, and it changes quite a bit depending on the service offering and what's actually delivered. So I think the trust has really come out in executing that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Bruce, I think you're up first. An ideal nap.
Well, I think, Jane, you challenged me, I think, was it last year or the year before? Asked me very difficult questions in front of a lot of people, and I do my best to respond, so thanks. But when you say NAP, do you mean a national action plan for what? Okay. And I would have loved to have had a look at it, but
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mean National Adaptation Plan or Action Plan?
Climate change, right?
It's just
Climate change.
It's action. Okay. Action plan. I got.
there's a bunch of naps. But I mean, I'm assuming it's your WASH plan, your national plan to achieve WASH. And I mean, I guess I would love to see the document. And I'm trying to understand also if your question, because if I'm remembering it right, one was about what makes a good WASH action plan, and then to what extent can you interface with it, and is it achievable? And I think that's a big thing, I think, from my perspective, because I think like there's the issue of it being comprehensive, and everyone talks about WASH systems and talks about the issue of like is there issues around planning and policy and financing and regulation and all is it all sort of complete and in place there? But then there's the issue of is it achievable, right? Is it like, and does it connect to the health plan? Because I think one of the things that I've been quite worried about is the WASH group, and sorry, this is like a bit of WASH and health kind of bias here, but just that in one level we want to reach safely managed, as we've talked about. And the other level, it's just, is that something that's like, what service level is achievable by when? And it does make sense to have I think a target that's technically credible or technically achievable, and not just politically like words, because then there's more accountability with it. Is it monitorable, all these issues? And then the other thing is just like, does it get to vulnerable groups, right? Like when we look at it, could there actually be targets in place, not just for service levels by a certain time, but actually looking at reductions in disease or other monitorable issues that are associated with health, and to what extent it connects to the Health National Action Plan, and to what extent is there coordination in place? So I just think there's a lot of complexity, and hopefully there's a tension, that tension between simplicity and complexity that kind of works. But Jane, it's not an easy question, and I'm just talking a little bit philosophically here, according to my own thoughts. But I would love to have a look at it, if you can share it, and also there's some pretty wise people that have struggled, I think, with national action plans. They're not easy. So, Nat, I'm going to stop there. But over to.
Okay, thanks. Yes, over and save Bruce.
Yeah. So I was going to start with the question that Jane asked on data, and I think what's interesting with sanitation data in particular is it sort of falls off as soon as we get to household level services, and it sort of mirrors where government ownership falls off too. So, and that's not surprising. So we have data on sewerage, for a lot of countries are reporting that kind of data. That's not the gap. The gap is where we, have household level self-supplied services for sanitation, that there is no data coming in. And so, the efforts we have to push more government accountability and ownership of sanitation services in rural areas and peri-urban areas also mirrors a need for better data, so that they can actually see what's going on in these areas. And I think, interestingly, in Kenya, when the utility expanded its service coverage to cover rural areas, they also correspondingly updated the national data monitoring system for safely managed sanitation. And they came to us asking about service models in rural areas, because they actually didn't understand what the service models were in rural areas that needed to be covered. And so I think, that's part of the challenge. It's not just about the data. It kind of reflects a bigger shift that needs to happen in terms of accountability for sanitation, and the shift to different types of services, because a lot of, when the government is running sewage services, then the data does come, and we do have some insight. But when there is no one in charge, essentially, which is what's happening for half of the world's population, basically, we don't have data for it either. So I think that's really sort of the challenge I'd like to put back, is that it's not just a data issue. It's sort of tapping into something bigger. And then when we look at the, just to add on to the question about the NAPs, and I narrowly would focus on the the corollary to the NDCs, the adaptation plans, I think the kind of things that we want to see sanitation in the NDC, first of all, just, that we're going to do something on sanitation. It should be there because that unlocks climate finance. But in the NAP itself, I think we want to see the detail of adaptation planning, mitigation planning, and we want to see a diversity of options. We don't, one thing we have seen repeatedly is, countries just coming forward with specific infrastructure suggestions, we'll raise latrines, and that's it. And, and there's this huge, that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, on the sanitation issue. There are all these policy and regulatory issues that need to happen. There's urban-rural solutions that need to be included. And so I think we're just looking for more comprehensive action plans that cover all of the population, that cover diversity of options, that have this sort of more transformative and bigger picture view of sanitation in the climate space.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question, but before I get to that, even though Barbara had to leave, she's still making her presence known. She passed me a note saying, please, everyone come to a session on Thursday, 8:30 a.m. at Roadbud towards global and national indicators for monitoring climate resilient wash. So for those of you who want, Bruce, are you sneaking out?
I have a sound check, but I'll be back in hopefully
That's the
5
oldest
minutes.
excuse. Okay, so they'll be presenting and discussing proposed indicators for global monitoring of CR wash, which seems very pertinent to this conversation. So one last question from Gustavo. I'm sorry. And is it really one question, or is it like secretly 4 questions split into 8 parts?
You usually know.
I know. Yeah.
No. I had a comment, but we may not have time, right? I mean, it's a comment, short comment. I'll try to make it short. No, thanks everybody, and great to see the progress you're making on the CRS. I just have, or wanted to make the point on WSUP, following the presentation by Sam, but also on your comment. Why I wanted to say this, and I wanted to underscore the difference that a strong regulator can make in a sector. I think WSUP is a perfect example. For those who are not so familiar, WSUP is the regulator of Kenya, but it's not just about having a regulator, as many other countries have, everywhere in the world and in Africa in particular, is having a regulator that has evolved since it was created, and I think it was in 2003, gradually improving and going from the first, benchmarking to tariff approval to adapting its regulations to the devolution process in Kenya, and moving towards creditworthiness. I mean, there are so many important milestones, and you see the results of the investment in the regulatory system and in the regulator that Kenya is achieving. It's kind of world class. I mean, of course, for the conditions in East Africa, but it should, from my point of view, it should not be underestimated. And I think the example you are giving about rural services in Kenya, in a way, indirectly, is also the result of the role of the regulator. Because it is the regulator, it is WSUP, who is creating the conditions and incentives for utilities to move in that direction. So I wanted to make this point. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone want to respond to that, or well articulated? Okay, so
Just to endorse it completely.
okay.
Thank you.
Consider the motion is endorsed. Okay, great. So thank you for our panelists. And I'm sorry I had to cut off the questions. I know there are other questions, which is always the best time to cut off questions, is leave them asking for more. But we're gonna, if this works, I'm going to take full credit for it, the video, and if it doesn't, I'm blaming Lindsay. So we're going to give this a try again, but if we could give a hand to our panelists here, thank you. It's not on my computer.
Hello, and I'm a senior water specialist at the World Bank. My presentation today will highlight the case of Cape Town, and the approach that has been adopted by the city to strengthen its resilience to climate change and to ensure sustainable delivery of water and sanitation services. Before I begin, I want to clarify that I'm not a representative of the City of Cape Town, and the insights that I'm sharing in this presentation are based on my broader understanding of the approach that has been used as a sector practitioner, and also on analytical work that has been conducted by the World Bank as part of our review of several case studies on climate resilient sanitation. Cape Town is South Africa's legislative capital with a population of over 4 million people. The City of Cape Town provides and regulates water and sanitation services, managing about 9,000 kilometers of sewers and 17 wastewater treatment plants, as well as smaller systems. So it's a relatively large system, reaching almost 90% of the city's residents. However, about 2% of the population use on-site sanitation, and there is still a large number of people that are not covered. So despite national mandates for universal access, infrastructure backlogs and climate shocks due to hazards such as droughts and floods remain major hurdles in Cape Town. The situation is compounded by broader urban challenges such as illegal solid waste dumping, which blocks sewers and stormwater drains and exacerbates climate hazards such as flooding. There are also a large number of informal settlements across the city that exacerbate the urban sanitation challenges. So Cape Town is a city that does have a citywide inclusive sanitation approach demonstrating several principles. Cape Town's approach ensures universal access through diverse solutions, both sewered and non-sewered systems, targeted support for vulnerable communities, so it's very inclusive, and strong community engagement. There's also an integration with broader urban services within the city's management structure. So there is a focus also on the policies, the institutions, and the regulatory aspects. So what have been the strategic responses of the city to the challenges that it is facing in regards to climate hazards? After the severe 2015 to 2018 drought that the city experienced that led to the so-called Day Zero crisis, Cape Town developed its strategic resilience strategy. The strategic response focuses on 4 broad areas: strategic transformation through a new resilience strategy. It's now not as new, but it is in place. Infrastructure and service provision, user engagement, and fourthly, institutional and policy measures. So what does this resilience strategy look like? The strategy prioritizes safe access for all, water conservation, diversified supply, shared benefits, and integrated water management. Collaboration and scenario planning are central to building resilience in this context. And the city's resilience strategy applies a holistic approach to the urban water cycle. It emphasizes access to water and sanitation while diversifying these water resources, as well as promoting a water-sensitive city that optimizes stormwater and urban waterways. So, with regards to the infrastructure and service provision aspects within the city, Cape Town's climate resilient sanitation infrastructure and service provision interventions go beyond traditional sanitation by embedding climate adaptation into every aspect of service delivery. And this includes diversified water sources, flood-resilient toilets, infrastructure upgrades, the use of treated wastewater to recharge aquifers, and the development of advanced purification facilities for potable water reuse also represent transformative shifts in water management in the city, addressing long-term water scarcity and promoting circular resource use. So again, we're seeing this shift, this rethinking of sanitation, not just to provide the service, but also looking at the broader urban water resilience aspects. And this is being done through 13 wastewater treatment plants, which are producing treated effluent for non-potable use, reuse for irrigation and industrial use in the city, with a 230-kilometer non-drinking water network delivering 50 million liters a day. There are also alternative sanitation solutions, particularly in the low-income areas where you have container toilets, chemical toilets, as well as portable flush toilets being provided in flood-prone informal settlements. The city is also investing in upgrades to its centralized sewer network, pumping stations and treatment plants to improve their resilience and address non-climate issues as well. So in addition to the infrastructure and service provision, there is a focus on appropriate institutional and policy measures to support these interventions. For example, the transformation of the water and sanitation department of the city into a modern customer-oriented entity demonstrates a systemic shift in governance. The establishment of future planning and resilience office likewise ensures coordinated long-term resilience planning across city departments. And in addition to this, engagement and coordination with other sectors within the city through the established structures are facilitating effective decision making and aligning actions towards overall city resilience. In addition to these, the city has developed service standards for non-sewered sanitation providers, with national standards released for public comment, as well as established standard operating procedures for decentralized treatment plants in areas lacking centralized capacity. So they are those interventions that look at the regulation aspects in this respect. So what are some of the key outcomes of these interventions? Cape Town's approach has delivered tangible results. There is improved water security. We see the city is on track for about 300 million liters a day additional water by 2030 as a result of these interventions. There has been expanded sanitation access, especially in informal settlements which did not have access to safely managed sanitation. The system is more resilient. You have fewer sewer spills, a 25% reduction, improved wastewater treatment capacity and water quality, reduced system failures, and stronger financial sustainability of the city. So revenues have gone up substantially. Between 2018 and 2022, there was an increase from about 80% to 93%. The city is also recognized as globally for its leadership and in terms of global knowledge sharing, and is sharing of lessons with other utilities worldwide, including through engagements such as these, where we're able to share some of these lessons that are now being recognized globally, and key elements of these are different cities in many countries are considering replicating them. So what are some of the key lessons that we learn from the case of Cape Town? Strong leadership is critical. the importance of diversification, diversified solutions, so not one size fits all for every part of the city, but looking at different solutions. The importance of innovation, not just technical, but also financial and institutional innovations. Deep community engagement is essential, and continuous learning and policy alignment help to mainstream climate resilience and inclusion in urban sanitation. And of course, the importance of the policy and regulatory aspects are critical, and the importance of political commitment cannot be understated. That's one of the most important aspects that underpins these results, because if you do not have the political support, then you would not be able to put all these important measures would just remain on paper. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope that you have been inspired by the case of Cape Town. It is not perfect, but I think this is an excellent example of climate resilient sanitation interventions. Thank you very much.
I love that example. I think we're looking for examples of success, and we're starting to see some. I think as part of Anne's presentation we focused a lot on, for much of this program, about what is climate resilient sanitation, what's the evidence of it, but now it's no longer, if it's a thing, but how do we do it? And I think that's what's really, I actually just got chills saying that. And I think that's a really great example of it. And so we've got a few minutes now I was going to do some group work, but I think we are a group. We don't have to break into groups. So just putting it out into the audience, and we're going to do this like Game of Thrones style, where you can call on anybody. So you might get your head cut off unexpectedly, but this may be why I'm not invited to do emceeing very often. But really just putting it out there, what do we need to go laboriously, rung by rung, up the sanitation ladder, or can we leapfrog? Can we jump from OD to SMS to CRS? Can we leverage, or how do we leverage CWIS, area-wide sanitation? How can we use some of these proven approaches to move faster and further? Rather than the really laborious slog of going rung by rung up that ladder. So who wants to take this on? And I will just call on you, because it's, Game of Thrones. Oh, great. Can you pass this down?
Thank you very much. My name is still Comfort Hajra. The sanitation ladder is a great thing. It's great that we know where people are when we're doing the sensitization. But it's also very key to appreciate that sometimes we are where we are because we have limited exposure to options. So from my experience and in my view, when people are practicing open defecation, it's mostly cultural. It's because by culture, a pregnant mother may not defecate in a toilet, or if I have more cows than you do, you have no right putting your feces together with mine, and therefore we have to split feces, and the best ways to do is to everyone find your space and defecate. So it's great that we know that when we're doing the activation, the messaging activation, market activation, and the sensitization. But sometimes it's an injustice for us to say, let's go step by step. Because one, there are some very early adapters. So giving a consortium of options and putting out the cost-benefit analysis for the people, it's like creating a market that has an equilibrium that I choose from. So that maybe if I've been practicing open defecation, and I have options like I have the fossil tanner, they have the pit latrine, I have the line pits, I have an option I am able to pick. It's very annoying when you come to me and tell me, oh, you've been defecating in the open, at least first cut and bury, or dig a pit, or do this. Then you come back and say, by the way, I told you to do this, but now I want you to upgrade. You're wasting my time. If I had the option to do it once, to do something better once, I'm not saying it's possible to go from open defecation to a seaward system. Even the mechanism won't be there. We won't even have the seaward system anyway. But my point is having a market that has the equilibrium and options for people to pick from, very cognizant of the cultural reasons and beliefs why people are where they are. So balancing the not being scientifically arrogant, but also being aware that we can always have everyone ready at every certain point. Like Bruce said, even people practice open defecation would love to use flush toilets given the chance.
Great, thank you for that. I think that was really insightful. Jason?
Can't help not it.
I think that was a great comment, and I think certainly there's so many cultural differences and things to be aware of, but I think the vast majority of people want a flush toilet, even an automatic flush toilet, if such a thing was available. And I think it's up to the innovators to do that and to respond to these needs, but it's also up to the regulatory environment to make it much easier to talk about bylaws, enforcement, whatever it takes to create that known market. And I think in this sector, like so many presentations start with the fact that there's more mobile phones than toilets, but whose fault is that? It's not anyone's fault. You know, it's our fault perhaps. And I think that was a great example of leapfrogging. So what was the USP was so strong on a mobile phone. It was, the cost was so high. Nobody trained anyone. No one talked about access to finance. It just happened. So I think if we create a very, very strong environment, the innovators will come and we will solve this.
So Jason, it's your fault that...
You don't two guys. I'm just...
I've been wondering. I'm sorry, actually, Ruth, you had a question.
Yeah, see, I just have, as I have the mic, can I just give a very short reflection?
I have a mic too, Sam.
Oh, you do?
But you go ahead. Just
that was embarrassing.
go
Sorry.
ahead there. No, please.
I insist.
Oh no, that backfired, but I'll take it. I just wanted to respond, Nat, to your question on, so my name is Ruthie Rosenberg. I work with Fresh Life, part of the Sanitation Collaborative, and based on our experience, gradually scaling up a practical climate resilient option that is not the shiniest, most perfect thing. I just wanted to share a couple of points in terms of how I think we could do that leap. The first, my favorite thing to say is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I totally agree that anyone would want a flush toilet, and if we wait until we can give them a flush toilet, we're just choosing to keep them using what they're doing now. The second is to start by asking people what they want. Even if we already know, if we're super confident we already know, there's value to hearing it in people's own voices, and there's actually value to people saying it. The act of saying what we want, I think, is really, really critical to then getting what we want. And then the last is, what we've found to be really effective is to show an idea, ideally let people experience, but at least show what it looks like. So practically, trying a container-based toilet can be life-changing. It is not what you think it will be. It doesn't smell as bad, and one of the things that we find is it's about convincing our customers that we actually show up with the service. So you just, we actually would just give people free toilets when we first started our in-home toilets to say, just trust us, we really will show up to empty it. You don't have to pay until we've emptied it a bunch of times, because if it gets emptied regularly, it's a great experience. If it doesn't, it's terrible. And so that consistency and showing that. And then in terms of our work with manual emptiers, it's just sort of bringing government to see that there's a version of, in that case, manual emptying, like consolidation, that can work. But just to say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, ask people what they want, let them say it, listen to them, and then show people what it's like, that it doesn't matter what they thought it would be once they've actually experienced it. Sam, back to you.
Take that away from me.
Thanks.
Shall I give it just a very brief reflection of others? But yeah, I think it's just to say that the fact that many countries' levels of safely managed sanitation is low, and there's a huge level of kind of sector reform that needs to happen, conversely can be framed as an opportunity in terms of climate resilience. So I do think in principle it should be possible to leapfrog, because if you're developing now, in some cases for the first time, more encompassing robust policies and regulatory frameworks for safely managed sanitation or sanitation overall, then there should be no particular barrier to mainstreaming climate resilience into those policies and regulatory frameworks. I think the biggest challenge is financing and this evidence gap that persists around costing. How much more will it cost to develop climate resilient solutions, and how then to fund that and build that into tariff structures and so forth. But
Thank you both and all, and amazingly, I'm sorry, we're already at 10, and we need someone to send us off with insightful comments and enthusiasm, and that's Anne. So make it happen.
Thank you. So very quickly, is this on? Yeah. So one, I think it's been a great conversation. I was here last year. We had a similar conversation, but we were still waiting for case studies to come forward. We weren't quite yet at talking about implementation, so it's great to see the conversation moving forward. The definition of climate resilient sanitation goes hand in hand with the work that we're doing on safely managed sanitation. I think we can all sort of agree on that these two areas of work, safely managed climate resilient sanitation, they basically go hand in hand. And as we move to 2030 and whatever the next iteration will be, I think we will be seeing that these two things are linked in a different way, but that gives us sort of momentum in the work that we're all doing. I think we've seen some great examples from the field of how partners are leapfrogging, how they're taking advantage of situations like Zero Day in Cape Town to really drive an agenda on climate resilient wash. That's fantastic, and I think that's the way forward. And then finally, we talked a lot about how policy, institutions, regulatory reform, these are all part and parcel of the climate resilient sanitation conversation. This is not just about a specific technology or a piece of infrastructure. So I think it's been a great conversation, great to see the evolution, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. And please do join Barbara's session on Wednesday when they'll talk about indicators for climate resilient wash. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Barbara's session's on Thursday.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Let's go to the plenary.
Well, you're not too far.
Your place?
So, to see you there.
Up, everyone. That was good.
So the lunch used to be
Something like you had okay, perfect.
yeah, brilliant. So we're on
just 3 seats.
So we just Friday. So like Friday, I've been on the.
Anyway, I've So what's your role? Have you been at Tier 5?
Yeah, last night.
I want to go say hi to this.
That's good.
Say hi and see what numbers are tomorrow.